tool for first-time Odoo development. My name is Yannick Tivis, and today I'm here to talk about a little crash course to give you some tips and tricks on setting up your dev environment. Say, for example, and I know that you've all been there, you just want to start working with a new framework and you think, oh, I would like to learn how to do more technical things, how to do customizations with it, and we always have a whole load of questions the first time we start working with the new framework. We will go over some prerequisites and know where to find the documentation. We will talk about using a proper IDE. We will talk about using Git on Odoo SH. There are a few specificities that you need to know. And we will do a lightning round with all the tools. And we will end this talk with a Q&A session. So don't hesitate to put your questions on the chat. So first, prerequisites and documentation. Let's put ourselves in the scenario. You just downloaded the Odoo source code from GitHub. You've gone through the deployment procedure. I mean, the Odoo documentation also comes with a full deployment procedure. So you just need to follow this, the points. Everything is in the doc. And you can really go from the very first point of this documentation, and you will have your entire code ready with a running local instance. You've got it, you've installed the needed libraries, and you launched a server using the binary files. It's running correctly, and you're ready to start. Right, but where is the doc? That's always the first question. There are several sources for you to find the documentation. The first one is the official documentation on odoo.com/documentation. You will find plenty of resources there on how to set up your models, how to take care of the front end, how to set up your views, etc., etc. You can also look at more technical Odoo experience talks, well, just like the ones that you can find on the Odoo YouTube channel. They are all available on the website and on the official Odoo YouTube channel, as I said, and you can rewatch them later as many times as you want. Next source is the Odoo code itself. Once you're familiar with the framework, you will find that the standard Odoo code is a great source of inspiration for your own code, and everything is there as soon as you're familiar with it. And of course, the last source is the Git commit messages. The R&D team has a nice policy in place to always write meaningful Git commit messages. So be sure to read them. You can use git blame to find why a line of code has been written and what's its use specifically. Now, the next point, how to use a proper IDE. That's always a big question. What's the best tool for the job? What should I use? Does Odoo recommend an IDE in particular? What should I be looking for on the internet? Maybe you can forget about always using the right tool for the job and use the right tool for yourself. We don't necessarily recommend one IDE or another. One of the strengths of Odoo is that you can do mostly everything from the command line, really. Some people like to completely use the terminal, use grep, pipe, and so on, to just run Odoo and code inside it. But if you really want to choose an IDE, here are the things that you should be looking for. Do you want an integrated debugging capabilities? Do you want to build a built-in Git integration? Do you want an easy code lookup? Do you want syntax highlightings? And so on, and so on, and so on. For example, I like to use an IDE with a nice, good looking UI, syntax highlighting, a nice way to navigate between the files, and that's all. No debugging capabilities, as I prefer to do it by hand, and absolutely no Git integration, as I want to execute my commands myself too. For you, it all depends on how you want it implemented and if you really want it in your IDE. If you still have trouble choosing, here are the 4 that I would recommend as we use them internally. You have Atom, Sublime Text, Visual Studio Code, or PyCharm. Personally, I use Sublime Text with 3 plugins, a tool to blame the files, a linter for the Python code, and a linter for the JavaScript code. I can guarantee you that these will be fine for the job as, again, we use them internally in the professional service technical team or in the different R&D teams in Belgium. But next, let's talk about Git. Good news, you don't have to worry about things, really. Bad news, you do have to worry about a few things for Odoo SH. When working with Odoo SH, there are a few caveats you should be aware of concerning Odoo SH. In case you don't know the principle, you push your commit on your online repository and a webhook triggers an update of the code directly on Odoo SH. First of all, pay attention to your module's version number. It's in the manifest. As you can see, it's that little number right there next to the arrow. Increasing the version number is what is going to let Odoo SH know that you should update the data on your module. Everything that it's in the data, all the CSV, all the XML, if you forget to bump the version number on Odoo SH, is not going to set that up to date, which means that all your views or your security rules, all these changes will be discarded, so never forget about the version number. Of course, there is an exception to this, the no update attribute. When you declare a record in Odoo, you can set up a no update attribute on the data. If it's set to true, as you can see it on the chunk of code on the screen, then no matter what you do, it won't be updated. That way, you let the possibility to the user to modify the record configuration without losing its modification on a module update. Next point now about Odoo SH is the merge tool. Now we have to talk about it, even though it's in Odoo SH and it's a function that is available to you. I would highly recommend that you do not use the drag and drop merge tool on Odoo SH. It's mostly there for the same reason that there is a Juniper editor on it. It's more for prototyping purposes. If you're working from a workstation, I would strongly suggest that you merge and rebase on your workstation and then push it by hand. Otherwise, you're just going to make a confusing Git repository, and that is for the same reason that I don't use a tool for my IDE to automatically commit, for example, or pull my branches. The Git history is always a disaster afterward. Okay, fine. Finally, many people forget about it, but if you're working with a big team, it's always a good idea to have a Git tree visualizer. I personally use TIG, which is very minimalist, and its interface is complex enough to do everything you want. I know that GitK and GitKraken are also very popular. You can use these. One of the ideas is just to have a visual reference of the changes that have been made from your team on your repository. It really helps to keep the things clean. All right, now the other tools. We are just doing a quick fly around here because all of this has been mentioned in other technical talks. Again, check odoo.com or the YouTube channel. You can go on it and check the videos, they are quite good. First, the browser tools. The tagline for this one is to press F12 or Ctrl-Shift-G, for example, on Google Chrome, on your keyboard and discover a load of debugging capabilities. You can check the HTTP calls that have been made to the backend. You can debug your front-end code, but more on that has been addressed in other talks. There is a link on the slide that you can check. You will find directly a talk made by Thibaut François last year, speaking about this tool that you can find on your browser. You can also use PyFlame in combination with Flame Graph. This tool is particularly useful if you want to debug in the case of performance issues. Say, for example, that there is a function that is using all your CPU and you would like to know what exactly that function is. You can have a recording of your stack trace and then debug it. Locust is used for load testing. It's very useful, for example, in the website applications if you expect high attendance, and we have some extra tools in Odoo like the data import and export, or the profiler that is available also in the base module. And finally, for the other tools, there is the best for the last. This one is going to change your life, trust me. It's the Scaffold command. Many people read about it in the documentation and then forget about it. This command creates a bare bone project, and all the skeleton is there with the manifest file, the init file, everything is in the right place, all your subdirectories are created to organize your code, and you just need to fill it in. This command will save you a lot of time. And thank you for attending, and don't forget that all the slides of the presentation will be available on the website or on my GitHub account. And as we still have some time, I'm here to answer to your questions, so don't hesitate to put them on the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick, for this inspiring talk.
Thank you.
We have some questions in the chat, so maybe we can process them each coming. We have a question from Dirk Howard. Is access to enterprise GitHub source available to enterprise users or just to partners? For example, learning partner or something like that.
In fact, the access to the enterprise repository is reserved to people who have a partnership contract usually. So yes.
So only enterprise users have access to enterprise code? Yeah.
But if you use the SaaS version, you don't have access to the code, the source code, but you have access to all the features that are defined and developed in the enterprise repository.
Okay. Odoo SH maybe? Do we have access to enterprise code?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe you can use Odoo SH if you want to play with enterprise code. We have an interesting question from Julien Castillo, don't know who he is. Does Odoo have any plan to improve documentation? It is known to be not always up to date. So, and also, do you plan to use some kind of use case as documentation module? Yeah,
so currently the technical documentation is not very user-friendly, and the goal is to refactor all the training, the technical training for the newcomers and the training that we give to the partners or people who have access to that. And the goal is to rewrite everything from scratch by starting with a use case, which is the real estate industry. So everything will start with a simple module on the real estate application, and then you will have an advanced tutorial on a different topic, for example, the mixins, or the web client to define new widgets, new views, etc. And each advanced branch will start from this basis. So the documentation and the technical training will be improved in that way, and so it will be more global, and it will be better for sure.
Okay, thank you. So you say that the guide that you will use for internal people will also be available for external people.
Yeah, people who follow the training.
Okay, that's a good news. Okay, a question from Bertancio. What kind of debug tools would you recommend to use? What are the ones that you use on a daily basis when developing for Odoo?
Yeah, it depends on what you want to achieve. So if you have issues, if you face issues with the web client, for example, you can still use the classic debugger, on which you put a breakpoint on your code, and when you execute code on the web client, you will stop at this moment, and you will be able to see the variable state on the chunk of code you are analyzing. You can go back and forth on the call trace. You can analyze the HTTP calls that are made to the server, check the answers that are provided by the server. So the classic debugger tool that you can use with your browser is available, and it's a good tool. If you want to debug the server code, so the Python code, in fact, you can use the classic PDB, so the debugger, the classic built-in debugger in Python. There are other libraries like PUDB, IPDB, etc. that provides more graphical tools to debug your code. For example, the pre-filling of the variables, or see the call trace easily, etc. So you can still use this. You can use print as you used to debug when you were at the university. And there are also other tools like, for example, if you have performance issues, you can use PyFlame, as I said, but there is also a decorator that you can use in Odoo. It's defined in the ORM, and you can use the profiler, so it's @profile. You can check in the source code. There are several examples in the documentation to explain that too. You can put this decorator on the method, and then when you call this method, you will have an analysis of the methods line by line, and on each line you will see, for example, the execution time, the number of calls that were made, so the SQL requests that were made to the database. You will see the number of calls, the time that was requested to execute this SQL request, and you probably will be able to identify what are the bottlenecks of your methods. For example, if you make a for loop and you call each time the same search to retrieve the same result, you will see that if you make, I don't know, 100 turn of the loop, you will see that you will make 100 calls to the database, and that way you will identify that it's an issue, and you can, for example, extract this value into a temporary variable and use it on the for loop and make only one request. It's quite useful if you want to analyze a whole flow and see what happened, and then improve the performances of your code. So there is the profiler. There is also another tool, the query counters, that we used in our testing coverage. So you can define, you can use this query counter and execute code inside it, and then you will see the number of requests that you make for a whole flow, a single flow, and you can use this test to ensure that if people add new features or make bug fixes on your code, that they won't add too many requests on the same flow. So it helps to ensure that you won't degrade the performances of your code, for example.
Okay.
There is also the shell tool. For when you launch a Odoo server using the Odoo bin file, you can just after that use the keyword shell, and it will open a new server on its single transaction, in which you will be able to create records, to test values, to execute methods, as if you were on a classic Python code, and then you can commit the transaction to put the results into the database, or roll back it But it's quite useful too to check values without having to re-execute a whole flow and put breakpoints to arrive on a single step on your execution.
Okay, thank you. So profiler,
debugger, classic debugger, server side, Python, client side,
query count,
also the shell tool,
query count and shell tools. Okay.
Query counter.
We have a question from Ruaf Ven. Are you also planning to use pre-commit, black, pepate, ESLint for cleaner code like DOCI is doing?
So it's a discussion that is quite
it's complicated.
It's hot,
it's a hot topic.
Odoo developers, because it's a topic that we are not always agreeing with each other when talking about that. So some people would say we have to enforce the usage of black, for example, or pepate. In Odoo, we have defined some guidelines, coding guidelines that we try at least to use when we develop new modules, to be sure that another developer is able to understand what we did, for example, because the name of the variables, the directories that we create, the way we split the code into files are easy to understand. Personally, I'm not fond of the usage of black on the whole code base, because we already developed a lot of things and the Odoo code base is quite huge, more than 400,000 lines of code, I think. So if now we decide to enforce the usage of black, it will be difficult because we have to rewrite a lot of lines, and so we will lose the history of what has been done when we will blame a line. So I would say that for a new project, it could be interesting to have those guidelines, but for a project like Odoo, which is already living for several years, it's not a good idea for me, but I'm not the, some people don't think like me, so.
Yeah, so that's a hot topic. So yeah. Maybe we will just say that new files will use more constraint rules and old files will stay as they say. Okay, thank you. Do you, from Dorma Jana, which one is better, pgadmin or dbeaver? Yeah, I suppose this question is about, do you use a tool to debug your database, or do you do it directly in SQL?
Yeah, so I'm quite old-fashioned, so I still use a PSQL to check my database and to analyze the requests, to see what are the algorithm that is used by PostgreSQL to execute a request, for example. And if I have to clean something in a database, I will do it myself by crafting my request myself. So I never use tools like pgadmin or something like that, but I know that people in the R&D department are using this kind of tools, so I could understand that it's useful, but I don't use them personally.
Okay. And there is a question from Mohamed Sheka about performance of SQL queries. You can do an SQL Analyze if you want.
Yeah, so this one is interesting. What can we do to analyze the SQL request? So we could use the profiler tool to count the number of requests, but when we want to analyze a single request, I think that the best way when we have to analyze complex requests is to use the explain analyze verb in the PostgreSQL database. So you have a request, you just have to put explain analyze before the request, and then PostgreSQL will display the algorithm that he used to compute the request. For example, I have a selection, having an aggregation, or something like that, and we'll say, okay, I put those values in a buffer, and then I will use 1, 2, 3, 4 loops to filter the first results of the request, and then I will make a second loop to compare them, etc. And you can see that there are some bottlenecks when looking at the execution in the single steps of PostgreSQL. You will see that there are some steps that are much more heavy than they should be, and then you can modify the request, see the differences, or even optimize the request by putting indexes on the field definition, etc. So at the beginning, it's a little complicated to enter into this, but when you are a little used with that, it's a very useful tool.
Okay. We have a question from Pankaj Prajapati about post init hooks. When is it executed? Only at installation time or several times? How?
Okay, so post init hook is executed only once. So it's when you install the module. So after the module installation, you put the module as to be installed, you load a new registry, and the module is installed. And at that moment, before committing all the results into the database, you will execute the single method named the post init hook, and it will be executed only once. So after that, if you upgrade the module, it won't be executed a second time. So you can use this if you have to create values or update values before using the module at the module installation for pre-existing records. For example, you want to create new taxes for a company, but you have to do it only once. You could do it in a post init hook.
Okay. I think we have time for last question from Xavier Doley. What is populate? It seems to be new in Odoo 14.
So population is a new tool developed by the ORM team, so the Metastorm team, in which you can define the rules to create new records, but on a large data set. So you will say my partners will have a name between this possibility to this possibility, and then you can define a lot of different possibilities, and you decide the number of records that you want to create. And when you decide to populate the database, it will create, for example, 1,000 partners and 1,000 products, etc., etc. Okay. And you can use this tool to, in fact, check the scalability of your applications.
Okay.
So it's quite useful.
And it's new with Odoo 14, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So we are short in time, so if you still have questions, you can ask them in the chat before it ends or in our discussion room. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yannick.
Thank you, and have a nice day.
Have a nice day.